Good afternoon. Today is April 4th, 2016, and this is the Glendale Water and Power Commission. Madam Clerk, if you would, please call the roll.
Sure. Before I proceed, Commissioner Camargo will not be here. So, President Hale.
Present.
Commissioner Avanesian.
Here.
Commissioner Chan. Present. And Commissioner Wall.
Present.
And 2 is consent. A, approval of the February 1st, 2016 meeting minutes.
Members, I don't have any modifications to the minutes. If anyone has any changes that they'd like to recommend, now would be the time. Otherwise, we will adopt that without objection. Seeing no changes, we'll go ahead and adopt that without objection.
3, GWP Commission staff comments.
Commissioners, any comments from members of the Commission? Mr. Zern?
Mr. President, members of the Commission, I'm going to take this opportunity to call Ms. Lee up here. She didn't think I was going to do this. Get this. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Catalina Lee. She is our new supervisor for our clerical staff. She takes Gloria's place. Took us a while, but we finally have been able to fill that position, and certainly we filled it with a top-notch quality person. I've worked with Catalina for a long time. She comes from the Public Works Department, where she did a great job most recently in Fleet. She's also worked in the library and HR. Did I miss any place?
No, you got it.
But she has done an outstanding job in every place she's been, and we're looking forward to having her here with us. So I just wanted to quickly, we asked her to come today to get a feel for how the Commission works, but I thought as long as she's here, we would introduce her. Look forward to her starting Monday.
Monday, yes.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So I'm a happy guy. April's ecstatic. Again, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Catalina.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank
Ms.
you
Lee,
so much.
Welcome to the party. We're all looking forward to working with you, and hope you are looking forward to the new experience.
Yes, me too. I'm grateful that I'm here, and I look forward to working with every one of you and our GWP family. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Without any further ado, I think that brings us to our main agenda item, number 4, reports. Madam Clerk, if you could read 4A, please.
4A, Conservation Drought Update. Michael DeGhetto.
Good afternoon, Mr. DeGhetto.
Good afternoon, President Hale, members of the Commission. My name is Michael DeGhetto, Assistant General Manager for Water at Glendale Water and Power. And I'm going to give a presentation, basically our drought and conservation update for April. And what I wanted to start with this time, just straight off the bat, is the graph. If we think back, the state originally set the target from June to February, and then later they extended that out till October. And our Glendale's original target was 20% cumulative conservation from June to February. And so I just wanted to really thank all of the customers because we hit that target, that original target. And we're actually a little bit higher, cumulative 21%. So everybody did a really great job conserving. The target right now is extended to October, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more as I go through the presentation. So, and as we discussed previously, when we were having those high numbers during the summer, that's really what helped our cumulative amount here during the winter months. When we dropped down, say, to 9.3% in February, we still hit that cumulative target for that time period.
Which, Mike, just a comment. February was a particularly bad month from a conservation standpoint for everybody.
Yeah,
as you may have seen in the Times today, an article, but a rather warm February, and that certainly wasn't just endemic to Glendale. It was something.
No, everyone had trouble in February meeting that high of a goal. But typically, that's also because normally February would be a very low usage month. So if we're comparing to 2013, and we used a little bit more this time, that's why it dropped down to 9%.
We didn't quite get the rain we had all expected.
Yeah.
So I was just going to point that out. So this is year over 2013 over 2015-16 comparison, right?
Yes.
So it's not just that our conservation rate dropped. It dropped comparative to the wet months we were getting back in 2013.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct, President Hill. And even having said all that, we still cut back 9%. So the State Water Project, and I actually have, since I did my report, a little bit more of an update. So the Northern Sierra snowpack right now is at 90% of normal for the same time period. The Southern Sierra snowpack's at 66% of normal. And Colorado River Basin's at 95% of normal. And part of that is Lake Mead storage is a little bit lower than the same time last year. And MWD storage overall is lower than it was the same time last year. So I had mentioned that we were in allocations from MWD, but part of the way that Glendale and all the Met member agencies helped get through the drought is to use through that storage that MWD has constructed. So that's why the storage levels are slightly lower than they were this time last year. So the recent state actions, the State Water Board proposed a series of conservation standard adjustments, and we're slated to receive a 2% credit. So basically reducing our standard from 20% to 18%. So, and we hit 21, but it's actually our standard going through October is going to drop to 18%. The credit's due to our location in the evapotranspiration zone 9, which is the South Coast Marine to desert transition. So it's just an abbreviation for the California Irrigation Management System, or CMIS, and that looks at evapotranspiration in different areas throughout the year. And there's definitely going to be additional actions from the state after their final measurements here in April. They may adjust the 18%, they may do some other things, so it may not be just that 18% all the way to October. Since our last commission meeting, we did go back to council. We kept phase 3 conservation in place with that phase 2 drought charge, which is a 75 cents per 100 cubic feet charge.
Before we move on, could I just ask you to define what evapotranspiration is?
Yeah, it's a combination of evaporation from soil as well as from plants. That's the transpiration part of it. So plants and the soil let moisture back into the atmosphere. And a lot of that depends on the region you're in and what the weather's like in the region. And that'll change in different areas over time. And that's what that California Irrigation Management System monitors with sensors. And it goes into a database. And it's really, for residential use, there are some, they call them smart irrigation controllers that tie with that data and help decide when to irrigate your property. But the main use for that is for farming, because farmers have such vast acreage that they have to farm, and that's how they control their irrigation. So using that system to help make adjustments for water agencies, knowing that a lot of the usage is related to irrigation, is why that standard's being used. And again, so the phase 3 is just 2 days a week, Tuesday and Saturday, no more than 10 minutes at each station. And then the enforcement activities, and again, this is February data I've got because I don't have the March data yet. So we sent out first warnings from anonymous reports, 48, and 4 people got a second warning related to that. And then our enforcement staff sent out 45 notices that might lead to citations. We had 3 citations issued in February. And then our AMI, our smart metering, sent out or helped our customer service staff send out 116 letters, make 3 calls to customers about leaks, and go and do 14 field visits. And then the system itself sent out 256 leak alert emails. And we still have really good information online to look at what kind of plants to use to cut back on watering. And then we still got some rebate programs, and MWD's in their budget cycle right now and is talking about refilling some of those rebate programs as well for appliances and things like that. And that's the conclusion. So hopefully sometime I'll be able to get a different slide for my closing. But
Hi.
yes.
Commissioner Chan.
Yeah, I have one question. With the Phase 3 conservation in place with Phase 2 drought charge, that's under recent actions, Glendale City Council. So when will they be reviewing again?
So, Mr. President, members of the commission, what we had done is put it on 6-month increments.
Okay.
And that's what we've consistently kept, and that's why we just went, that was a 6-month. So if we don't go back, then it automatically goes into effect. So we try to make
Okay.
sure that we get back to them.
Okay.
I think this time, though, we wrote in 12 months, the potential for 12 months, or we
Till
kept
December.
it till December.
December.
So unless, of course, something else comes up, we'll go back to them immediately if necessary. But generally speaking, it's 6-month increments. In this case, we went to the end of the year.
Okay.
Again, there's a lot of uncertainty. We'll see. April 1st is usually that sort of witching hour of the wet season. So Mike is waiting for MWD to kind of give the reports and see what it's like. But I think most people feel that drought conditions will remain, at least to some extent, if not the way they are today, going forward through the summer. So we'll wait and see and then kind of react accordingly. But at this point in time, revenues are truing up fine in comparison to what our expenditures are. So loss of revenue has been offset by reduction in sale or purchase and the drought charge, the Phase 2 drought charge. So we're still good.
Okay, that's good to know, because from what I can remember, I think it's been at least a year, right?
Oh, it's been, let's see, the Phase 2 went into effect shortly after the new rate structure went into effect.
Okay.
We immediately did a 6-month moratorium then. That then had the automatic. So 6 months later, the Phase 2 rate charge went into effect, and we have deferred it twice. So it's
Right.
more like around the 18-month
Yeah.
period if you look from when we actually put
Exactly.
Phase 2 in. Yes.
Okay, and so they'll be reviewing in December, which means it's going to be another 8 months. Okay, good. Thank you.
Unless, of course, with the caveat,
change.
if
Yeah.
something happens that,
Right.
that requires us to go back. But aside from that, we would not be back to council for until the end of the year.
In a year. Okay.
Calendar year.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Seeing none, let's go on to 4B, please.
4B is recycled water update. Michael DeGhetto.
President Hale, members of the commission, I gave a recycled update last year in April, so this is essentially like our annual update related to that. And I thought, I would talk a little bit about the history. Really, GWP's been a pioneer in recycling. So the city of Glendale is a co-owner in 1976 of at that time, the new LA Glendale water reclamation plant. So 2 years later, the first recycled water use was for cooling towers at the Grayson Power Plant. And then in 1992, the Forest Lawn Project, as we call it, was the first of several recycled system expansion projects. And since that time, since 92 to 2014, the city's invested $20.3 million in expansions of the recycled water system. And in 2015, based on the 2015 usage, over 6% of our water demand was supplied by local recycled water. And our recycled system has about 21 miles of recycled water mains, 6 recycled water pump stations, 5 storage tanks, 56, with a total of 56 users. And the uses include irrigation, cooling, dual plumbing, and then dust control. And to give an overview, I'm showing the recycled mains, And then those facilities I was talking about, starting at the LA Glendale water reclamation plant, and then the various pump stations and tanks. And one thing to think about when you look at this map, the potable system is in every street. So if you just take a map of Glendale, every single street's got a pipeline in it. Every single residence or commercial user has a service line coming off that pipeline. When I show the recycled system, it's that. It's just that. It's almost like a skeleton. And that's really because the main focus is to get that recycled water to really large users. And then basically not also have like a whole other water system in parallel to the existing water system as well. So the more recent and current projects is an extension to the Public Works yard where the street sweeping trucks are going to fill up there. They fill up now out in the system off of recycled hydrants, but then right at their yard they're going to be able to fill up as well. The Upper Shoal recycled tank rehabilitation, which was that green tank I had on that other picture, and then the Burbank interconnection. And that's just a picture of the equipment there, which is in our yard at the UOC. And what that's got is a check valve and a meter. And the reason for putting that check valve in is if the Lagwort plant is down for maintenance, we can open that interconnection with Burbank, and that check valve will prevent that water from, like, say, feeding backwards to the rest of the system. And the reason that we needed to do that project was we have customers now with the dual plumbing on that side of the system, like Disney and some other facilities. And really, when the recycled system was built, like I was showing, it's mostly irrigation. So the reliability isn't as important as it is on the potable system. So by putting dual plumbing in a building, then the reliability comes a little bit more important. So that's why we did that upgrade there. And then, so some upcoming projects are the Hoover Keppel Toll project, which is, what I'm showing there is we're going off an existing main in Glen Oaks up to the Keppel Elementary, the Toll Middle School, and the Hoover High School. And that's going to be 55 acre feet per year of water that's going to be offset from our potable system. And it's a $2.9 million project, and we've got a $1.6 million Prop 84 grant, which we recently got approval for. And then the next big project that we're going to work on is with City of Pasadena, and the first phase of their project is going to use 700 acre feet a year. And then ultimately at full build out, they're going to be at 3,100 acre feet. And I've got a map to show those projects. Yeah, so the Hoover Toll and Keppel is in that blue line kind of on the left over there. And then City of Pasadena is on the right over by Shoal Canyon. Then Chevy Oaks, Camino San Rafael, and the Chevy Chase, those are longer term projects when we get funding for that. And then right in the middle of that Glendale T would bring that recycled line kind of through downtown and also loop our system. So that might be one of the later projects that we would do for full build out of the recycled system.
Excuse me.
Yes.
With the City of Pasadena projects, what's our exposure in terms of financial?
Well, there's no exposure related to that. So starting in 1993, Glendale and Pasadena signed a recycled water agreement.
Okay.
And the City of Pasadena has already contributed funds to upsize the mains and the pump stations and the reservoirs that we put into place to feed their system. They just haven't been able to build the system out and take deliveries into Pasadena since that time. So their city council recently passed the EIR and approved that. So once that goes into place, even initially during that first phase, we may or may not have to install some pumps, which Pasadena would pay for. You know, we built the pump stations big enough, basically we call them pump cans. So they have extra pump cans that we can put a pump in when we need it. And Pasadena will pay for those pumps, and then we'll track, and we track the charges now for the recycled system, and we'll track all the charges related to operating that part of the system, and then Pasadena will reimburse us for that.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay, thank you.
and one thing that's really good about that 3,100 acre feet, even though Glendale's not using it, that comes out of that total from Met, and we're all connected to Met. So that basically frees up potable water for all of the Met member agencies, including Glendale. And then I'm really happy to have a different ending slide on this one, but that's the, that's our recycled water sign.
Mr. President, members of the commission, just future, we'll be coming back to you. I don't have a date yet. So we'll show you the more comprehensive water capital plan that we have, and we'll have incorporated into that some level of recycled expansion. But that gives you a big picture look at what our obligations are on the potable system, and then what that means as far as building out the recycled system. In other words, you got a little bit of competing interest there. To the extent that we can work the two in concert with each other, we will. Something like the Hoover-Keppel toll, that's going after a lot of acre feet on a use of landscaping that is recreational and educational. As opposed to ornamental, because we still don't know what the state's going to do. I don't know if the state's going to have further restrictions on ornamental turf. So all of those things combined, I think you'll get a broader look when we bring back to you the capital program, and you get to see both sides of it, if you will, and then how we work that all into our capital program. As usual, and as I know you know, it comes down to money. So it's how we best spend that amount of money that we have, and where we get the biggest bang for our buck, both in our service to the customer and our ability to reduce the use of potable water. So I just wanted to mention that's coming. I don't have a specific date, but you'll see that coming up in the future.
Okay. I think we have budget right now scheduled for May, right?
We have budget next month, yes. Yeah. It says tentative, but we will bring you the budget. Yeah, we've got it.
Okay.
It could change slightly between now or between next month and the final budget to the council, but I don't really foresee a lot of change. So we will have it on the agenda next month. Excuse me.
Okay.
That'll have the capital program in there looking at the year.
Right.
What I'm coming back to you with, or what I was referring to, is more along the lines of the 5 to 10 year long-term range. You can get a hard look at where we're at, condition of our system today, where we have issues in certain parts of the city, and whether that's pressure, whether it's fire service, and those kind of things. You get to see the big picture, from a master planning type of a standpoint. For the budget, you'll see next year's proposed.
Right.
But what I was referring to is a bigger picture.
Right, and it makes sense to do it after.
Yes,
okay.
You could. Well, we don't have any choice because we're not there yet. So we're still working on it. We don't have something to present to you. So Mike and his staff have just kind of done they've got the foundation for it. Now we need to just sit down and start looking at how we're going to parse that out year to year, and more importantly, how we're going to pay for it.
Okay, and the 5-year plan will not be presented to council?
It will eventually, but we'll come show you.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you have any input in that, we'll roll that in, and when we make a presentation to council, we'll let them know that was comments made by this commission. So, yeah, absolutely.
But that would be done after the annual budget.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
The budget's going to be a 1-year look, so you'll be able to see that. Even though we have a 5-year program, it's only funded for 1 year, so it becomes fairly fluid in a lot of ways. And more so right now with water, because we just completed this immense study. So as it's a right time for us to show you what we project for the future. At least a hard 5 years, 10 years may be a little bit too long to think out, but although we can pretty much identify some of the areas that we're going to have to get to in that period of time. So yeah, for the budget, you'll see the 1-year shot, and we'll show you the projects that are included in that. But this is a more comprehensive look at the capital improvement program, which we'll take separately.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you.
Commissioner Well?
Yes, I have a question. I think I know the answer already, but I want to clarify it. Your previous presentation obviously was about addressing the need to reduce our water consumption because of the drought, and we have state mandated goals. Is there any connectivity between the purple pipe and the recycled water and meeting those state goals? In other words, do we get any kind of credit for having recycled water or using recycled water?
President Hill, Commissioner Law, credit to the extent that the conservation standards were set based on residential gallon per capita per day use. And I guess possibly embedded in that, like our overall use already has that 6%, that goes towards recycled water. But the specific credits that the state was looking at giving right now, like I said, we're going to go down to 18% because of the evapotranspiration zone that we're in. It had to be projects since 2013. For whatever reason, the state made some sort of demarcation related to that. So our existing recycled system doesn't really get us credit for that.
Right.
For being an early adopter. But,
right. So no credit for time served.
That's
right.
No,
which is not unusual.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not unusual.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, any other questions? Let's move on to 4C then.
4C, RPS Update Power System Remix, Lon Peters.
Afternoon, Mr. Peters.
Afternoon, President Hale, members of the Commission. I'm Lon Peters, Integrated Resources Planning Administrator. And I'm going to be going over the current state of our RPS compliance, renewable compliance, and what we expect to see over the next several years as well. Some of these will be repeat slides that you saw in January, but with some new information embedded in them, and there will be some new information separately as well. So this is going back to the basics of what do the RPS regulations require us to do. We had a first compliance period, which is now completed, and I'll go into our compliance achievements with respect to that period. There is an earlier period before the first compliance period where we had to get into some negotiations with the CEC about what we accomplished in the way of renewables before 2011. Before 2011, public consumer-owned utilities were not covered by mandates. It was voluntary, and we managed to get some credit, however, for that period. We are in the middle of the second compliance period, which has different regulations scaling up. And then we have projections now going out all the way to 2030 when the new 50% standard goes into effect under SB 350. And associated with the period after 2020, there will undoubtedly be new regulations that we will have to comply with as the CEC works out the details of what it means to get to 50% by 2030. So in the first, excuse me.
What percent of our portfolio does 356,000 RECs represent?
I'm sorry?
What percent of the portfolio does 356,000 REC equivalent?
356,000 is about a third of our load right now.
Okay. So that would be a full 33% RPS.
That would be 1 year's worth of compliance.
1 year's worth of compliance for things.
Right. You're jumping ahead, I think, right?
Sorry.
Okay. We can go there if you want, but
I know, sorry.
All right. Okay. So going back to the first compliance period, we had an obligation of 20% on average, and we met that obligation. When the CEC looked at the individual numbers, they said, well, we have a concern about 600 out of the 600,000 RECs that you turned in. And we had some discussions with the CEC and realized that, or accepted, let's just say, that they were correct with respect to those 600 out of 600,000, and we would not have we would not argue about that. So we met our compliance obligation in the first compliance period. What's called the bucket evaluation here down at the bottom has not yet been done. So the CEC has looked at total compliance, that 20% number, but then within that there are, again, additional sub-standards, if you will, within the 20%. So they have not completed that analysis yet. So we have to have a certain amount of RECs in bucket 1, bucket 2, and bucket 3. No more than a certain amount in bucket 3 and no less than a certain amount in bucket 1, and the rest in bucket 2.
When you say bucket, you mean the compliance period?
No, I'm sorry. It's called, the formal name is product compliance category, but we call them buckets because it's shorter. Bucket 1 is delivered, or PCC 1 is delivered first to a California balancing area. Bucket 3 or PCC 3 are TRECs, just stripped from the energy themselves, and we buy those like slips of paper. And they're very inexpensive, but we cannot buy very many of them. And then everything else falls into what's called bucket 2 or PCC 2, which is firmed and shaped, which means that the energy is generated in 1 hour and delivered to us in a different hour, which means there's some non-green energy mixed in there that we have to take account of.
How much of a delay is there in terms of a tolerance for that bucket? So in other words, they're generated 1 hour, delivered another hour. How many hours can pass before that energy is generated and you can still count the REC as bucket 2?
We have grandfathered contracts where the energy is generated in 1 calendar year and there's a true-up early in the following calendar year. So, and those count, but they're grandfathered. They're really old.
Right.
The new ones, the RECs, I'm not exactly sure. The RECs are not generated until 60 days after the day of generation. So the energy comes out of the wind farm or the solar facility on one day. The RECs don't actually get created and put into the system until 2 months later, and then we get the RECs. But the energy is actually... I'd have to look at a confirm actually to see. I don't think there's a regulation that restricts us right now. We get a lot of bucket 2 energy within a calendar year, and that's not a problem. Okay. So if we keep it short enough, it's not a problem. I don't know what the exact cutoff is. I'm sure there is one. So
is it the case that you have the REC has to catch up to the power, and then the power sometimes has to catch up to the REC? Where the REC is generated first, and then we are waiting for an energy delivery, it's
the other way around actually, because what happens on an individual hour, let's say it's a wind farm in Oregon, the turbines actually generate 4.7 megawatts on that hour, but under the terms of our contract, we get 5. So, and then 60 days later, and we actually get the 5 on that hour.
Right.
And then 60 days later, we get the REC for the 4.7, and then and then at the end of the year, we turn in the 4.7, but we have to, as compliance, or at the end of the compliance period, but then we also have to account for that 0.3, which was not green energy. And we have to, when we're doing our greenhouse gas compliance, because that won't count as carbon-free, unless we go a different route, which I'm not going to complicate matters with at this point. So the generation and the delivery typically happen on the same hour. It's just that the generation won't match the energy delivered on that hour because the generators are moving around within the hour, and they might be above, they might be below, but we've signed a contract that says we get 20 every hour during a certain month or during a certain period of time.
Sorry to take us on this tangent. I know it's a little weird, but it's kind of central to our compliance because the Energy Commission is going to adopt a regulation, or it continues to adopt regulations deciding which of our contracts essentially comply with RPS. and how we can structure these agreements such that we can take delivery of the energy and then count it towards the RPS program, which guides all of our procurement moving forward. And then it also helps determine how we do our accounting to make sure that we're counting correctly. So sorry for the taking us on this sort of detour. I was just curious how.
And the term.
Yeah.
Dictating the term.
Right.
Of
the
those
terms of those agreements.
The most recent contract we signed was the 25-year Schuyler Resource contract for renewables, but they're firmed, which means, again, on every given hour, we get exactly 50 or exactly 49 or whatever number they told us the day before. And then after the fact, there's an accounting that says, okay, of that 50, how much of it actually was produced by the solar facility or the wind facility, and how much of it was not. And then we only get credit under RPS for the part that was actually generated. So it's always the lesser of analysis. There's a schedule, which is how much we get, and there's a meter, which is sitting on the generator itself. And we always get the lesser of the two. So if there's more, for some reason, we don't get that value. And that's can be a problem.
So the generator, sorry.
No, you go right ahead.
So the generator actually has to do the accounting work of demonstrating to the utility what it is that they're generating at any given time.
There's a meter on every generator.
Okay.
And that meter is counting the output of that generator every hour.
But
and that all goes into databases, which then we have to get copies of.
Right.
I think, Commissioner Lal, to your point, we don't actually get real-time data on what portion of what we're getting is renewable. We just get scheduled power.
Right.
Right.
So under the firmed and shaped agreements, we're just getting our lump sum of electricity that we're entitled to.
Right.
And then we have to true up the renewable quotient of that after the fact.
30 to 60 days.
30 to 60
Right.
days later. Yeah. So
When the generator essentially communicates with us about what it was that what the proportions were and what they were providing us.
Well, what they'll give us 60 days later is the REC, which is the green portion, but then they have to keep records, very hourly records of every generator, so that after the fact, at the end of a year, at the end of a compliance period, the CEC can go through, if they want to, every hour of every generator and every hour of every schedule.
for an audit.
On an audit basis, and compare the two to make sure that we're not claiming more than we are entitled to.
And Mr. President, I was just going to mention, you're hearing the words firming and shaping, and I wasn't sure if everybody was aware of that, but I'll just take wind and solar, for instance, which is not a consistent, reliable source of power. Oftentimes, it's natural gas that's used to firm it. So when we get the power, as Lon said, 4.7 of it may be solar, or wind is the example Lon gave, and the other is the gas that was used to firm that or shape that power to deliver it to us. We don't get credit for that. But we get 5 megawatts. That's what we want. Now, it could even be that the difference could be less depending on the day. If the wind's not blowing, it may be a lot more gas than it was wind, and so that means our REC is even less.
Right.
So.
But when we sign contracts for this energy, we want to know exactly how many megawatt hours we're going to get each hour, because we can't have those numbers moving around on us because we don't have the ability currently to follow moving numbers. We have to have solid, firm numbers coming in to us, and then we adjust the generation at Grayson, or our real-time contractor adjusts other purchases to account for differences between schedules and actuals. But the contracts we sign are for firm delivered on the hour. One thing that's notable here as well is that you'll see that it took all of we filed, let me back up. Compliance period 1 ended at the end of calendar 13. We filed in the middle of calendar 14, all the data. It took until early 16 for the data to be all verified. So it took a year and a half from the time the CEC got the data from us till the time they said it was okay. Okay, historic carryover. So we're going back to the history of pre-obligation, that is before the time when Glendale had an obligation to have renewable energy in its portfolio, and instead we did so on a voluntary basis. We got into a situation, a number of utilities did. This was not just a Glendale-specific situation, where utilities who had voluntarily or prior and even prior to IOU obligations had done renewables anyway because it was a matter of their own policy or the CPUC said it was a good idea or whatever. And many utilities argued that they should get credit for that, early adoption or early movement in this direction of renewables. So the CEC had a formula that they took from the CPUC, and they said that formula applies to the publicly owned utilities as well. And we modified the formula because we said it didn't work for us, it didn't apply to us, it came up with wrong results. And then we submitted all of the data for 2004 to 2010 associated with that formula that we argued was the correct way to do it, not the way the CEC told us to do it. We sent in over 360,000 equivalent RECs. Just think of them as old RECs. And the CEC came back early this year and said, or late last year, and said, you can have all but 5,000. So we were very successful. We've had a verification and acceptance by the CEC that we now have another 356,000 in the bank from that early period when we were integrating renewables on a voluntary basis. So we're building hopefully a big bank. All right, this is calendar 14, the most recent data that we have. The calendar 15 data is not finally scrubbed and ready for submission to the CEC. You can see over here, this thing doesn't work over on that screen, but on the top right blue section is 39% remote renewables, meaning not inside Glendale, and 6% local renewables, meaning landfill gas, and some distributed solar photovoltaics. So we had about 45% of the energy that came into the city of Glendale and was used in Glendale in calendar 14 that came from renewables in 2014, which was way over what we had to do. And the rule that we were working against was 25% by 2016, which is this year, with interim progress, whatever that means. So we overcomplied. We had to do more than 25%. It wasn't clear exactly how much more. We actually retired 30%, retired RECs for 30% of our load. We estimate for 2015 and 16 it'll be back down to 25%. The difference between the 44% in this slide, 45%, and the 30% on this slide went into the bank. So we basically took all of the T-RECs, all of the short-term RECs, all the short-term contracts, and that we had to retire, and we retired all of those RECs, and then we took the remainder, which was the grandfathered resources from pre-2011, and some long-term contracts, and we put those in the bank.
So can we back up to the pie chart real quick? So among, or within that slice, the 39% slice of the pie, how much of each bucket is represented in that slice?
Well, there are no T-RECs because this is just energy.
Okay.
It's grandfathered and long-term and bucket one and bucket two.
Okay.
And I don't have the breakdown here in front of me. If we can get that for you, if you're interested.
Yeah. Love to see.
Okay. Thank you. Let me make a note. Okay. So there are 4 different compliance categories, if you will, in that slice. Looking ahead now, we're climbing toward 33%, and then after 2020, we're climbing toward 50%. And as I mentioned earlier, we expect to see more regulations about exactly what it means to make progress during the 2020 to 2030 period. For planning purposes, we're just assuming linear compliance obligation. So we just climbed from 33 to 50 by 13 divided by 10. So the next section of the presentation is about what's going to happen in the long term. We did study in the IRP last year what the options were. We took into account and made projections of existing and planned, that is, supplies that we already have under contract or we think we're going to have because we're taking other actions. And then we identified the gap. And then I'll talk a little bit about the gap between what we think we have to do and what we already have in the works or under contract. And then I'll talk a little bit about storage, which is integral to getting these resources delivered to load on a firm basis. So this is just a very simple graph that shows the obligation climbing from 25% now to 33% in 2020 and 50% by 2030. The lower line is where the law was before the end of last year, and the upper green line is where the law is now. And we did study the green line in the IRP that was completed at the end of June of last year because we thought we saw 50% coming. So while we were doing the IRP, we thought, well, we'd better look at it and see what it might mean. So I'm sorry, what was our question? Okay. So this is the slide. This slide shows percentages. This slide just converts those percentages into megawatt hours to give you a sense of where we are in terms of the physical number of megawatt hours we're going to have to bring in mostly from the outside, some from internally, but mostly the outside. So we're at 300,000 now, and we're going to have to climb to almost 600,000 by 2030. And that tail off after 2030 is just because it's projected that the conservation and energy efficiency efforts will start to bring load down more rapidly than at that point, the 50% is fixed, and then the load reductions that we're getting out of energy efficiency and demand side management overpower the increase. So this is an important slide because it shows where we are today. We're expecting new landfill gas combustion this was as of the results of the IRP last year, that would come online in 2018. It's not clear that that's going to happen. That's still being examined. The design work is still going on, but no final decision has been made on that. If that new landfill gas combustion does not come online and generate the additional megawatt hours, then that line the green line will be lower by that increase in 2018 of about 70,000 in this graph. In 2022, you'll see a contract coming off. That's a very small wind contract in Wyoming. That contract expires in that year. We don't know yet whether it will be renewed. It could be. In 2027, we have another wind contract coming off in Oregon. And in 2028, a wind contract coming off in California. These are just contracts expiring on their own. And in 2031, a very small geothermal contract coming off in the Imperial Valley. And then this puts the two together. The requirement, which is the gray line on the top at the end, it's underneath the blue line at the beginning, and the blue line which shows where we are now, what resources we already have under contract or own, and what those resources are expected to produce each year. Of course, if the landfill gas combustion repower does not happen, that line will change. It shows that we're fine for the moment. We're actually building that bank. We have historic carryover for a year's worth, approximately, at 33%. So that will help us around 2021, might help us delay a decision by a year, a new contract coming on, or new ownership, new resource that we might own coming online. But by the early 2020s, we need to be ready to have new supplies actually being delivered to the city. One of the basic problems with renewables is how do we turn that intermittent supply into firm supply? So we could do that with a remote resource, as we do today, for the most exclusively, where somebody else takes the energy in and gives us back the energy on a firm hourly basis at some point later. Tieton, which is a small hydro project in Washington, for example, we get the firm energy back 1 week later exactly. That's the contract that we've signed. In the future, we will probably continue to rely on external firming, that is, third parties taking the energy in as it actually is generated and then giving us back at a later date firm energy. We also might use a New Grayson power plant to do the firming ourselves. So the plant would be connected via telemetry to the external resource, and the output of Grayson then would float up and down as the renewable energy project floated down and up. So that we could do that ourselves with gas, or we could do it with storage. So one of the things that's happened since the first of the year, we've completed a contract with Schuyler Resources to get 2 megawatts of storage to be installed by sometime later this year. Schuyler came to us in the fall of last year and asked for a change to that 25-year contract that would bifurcate it, novate it, and have a short-term contract or short-term obligations shifted over to Morgan Stanley, and then Schuyler would take over the remainder of the contract. And we said, well, that's going to harm us because we can't bank the RECs from a short-term contract. And we negotiated an agreement with Schuyler that we would receive storage as compensation for that loss of bankability. We just recently completed the negotiation of the actual storage agreement and got that executed. And Ramon's staff over on the electrical side are working with the contractor at one of the substations who's already on site. Schuyler's working with them as well. So we have a battery storage, a battery manufacturer, which is Saft, which is a French company. And then we have a local contractor who's already on site getting the site prepared to receive basically a container of storage. So it all comes in one shipping container. You've got the lithium-ion batteries, the control equipment, the HVAC systems, and the fire suppression systems all in one unit. They bring it in, and as we told them, we want to just plug it in. We don't want any complications. We want to just point to where it goes, and we'll get it ready to be plugged in, and then you guys plug it in and test it and turn it over. And then Schuyler will do the O&M for 2 years on their dime, and then they will turn the units over to us, and they will be our megawatts of storage. The O&M will become our responsibility at that point, but we will have 2 megawatts of utility scale storage to work with. So once the batteries are installed at the end of the year, we need to think about how we want to use them, because you can deploy these batteries in a number of different ways. You can set them to respond to different things that are going on in your system. And this is a couple of examples. We have a new contract between Glendale and Los Angeles that governs the interactions between the two utilities at Airway, at the interconnection between Glendale and Los Angeles. And we are being required, or not required, we've agreed to operate in a much more tight manner at that interface so that what we schedule is closer. I'm simplifying here a lot, but what we schedule is closer to what actually happens. And if those two numbers get too far out of bounds, we start to pay penalties. They're not huge, but there's still financial consequences. So one of the things we could do is set the batteries to just respond to that deviation at Airway. And to the extent that it looks like we're taking too much, the batteries would start to drain and reduce that oversupply, that excess import coming in. The batteries would respond and push that back down again or push it back out, and the opposite could happen. So the batteries could, instead of draining, they could be storing if we're getting too little. So that's one option. Another way would be to set it up to respond to local PV. So we could have telemetry from a collection of photovoltaic installations, and we'd have the batteries respond to those and see which way the batteries work the best. So that's what we plan to do next year. And then when we get there, and then that will help us over the long term understand which battery operations we need and or could best benefit from, and then as battery prices come down, as they are expected to do over the next 5 years, and we're ready to buy a lot more, perhaps, we will have a much better idea about how we would use them and how to model using them.
So where you place it on the grid probably matters a lot as far as which of those strategies you want to employ, right?
Actually, no, because there are reasons to put batteries in certain places on the grid. Yes, if we have a weak spot and we need to, where the voltage might start to sag because the distribution system isn't able to keep the voltage up on it when there's a lot of when the air conditioners are all running at the same time, or the pumps or whatever. So there are times when battery deployment across the system does make sense. In this case, it's just telemetry. So we can set the batteries up near airway and at another location, connect them directly to airway, and then the batteries can respond. Yeah, so it really doesn't matter. Now, if we were getting into smaller deployments or batteries in conjunction with solar PV, that would be a different story. Yeah. So this would be another way, the third way. So firming and shaping by others, firming and shaping with gas by ourselves, or firming and shaping with storage. And the storage could be here, the storage could be at the power plant, wherever that power plant happens to be. And again, it's just telemetry at that point. So we're facing some new types of regulatory uncertainty. This is, I guess, a continuing problem or issue. Right now, because we have two kinds of obligations. We have carbon obligations and we have renewable obligations, and they interact. And one of the ways they interact is that we are allowed to take an RPS adjustment to the carbon obligation. So we calculate our carbon obligation because of how much generation we produced inside the state, and how much carbon was associated with that. And then we can, and then there's carbon associated with the renewables that we're getting that are firmed and shaped, because that's not all green energy. And right now we can take a reduction to our carbon obligation based on the amount of bucket 2 renewables, the firmed and shaped renewables, that we bring in. There's discussion of eliminating that adjustment or changing the way that adjustment is calculated. And so there's a risk that the RPS adjustment, which benefits us now, could be changed in a way that would increase our carbon obligations. And as the amount of renewables on the system increases, and therefore as the amount of PCC2 or bucket 2 renewables increases on the system, this will become an increasing issue for us, just in terms of how large that adjustment is and how much it increases or affects, up or down, our carbon obligations. And as carbon becomes more expensive, which we expect it to be as well, it will have cost implications in the future. The CEC is also now developing rules and penalties for non-compliance. We've heard some pretty scary numbers. I don't know what they're actually going to land on, but we're in good shape, so we're not really worried about facing any of those kinds of penalties. And another topic that I should have added to this slide is starting in the first compliance period after 2020, there's a new rule in the statute that at least 65% of the RECs have to come from long-term contracts or owned resources, which is a fairly hefty shift in our portfolio. It would be in our portfolio, from short-term purchases, even long-term contracts, even some longish term contracts, to at least, I think it's at least 10 years, or we have to own them. And if we go the contract route, there will be issues about contract compliance and whether the contract qualifies. If we go the ownership route, there are risks associated with ownership, of course. So one of the implications, I should say, of this new 65% rule after 2021 is that we may have to build in a buffer, as we have in the past, in case something gets disallowed because we don't want to face penalties, so we always want to over-comply a little bit because in terms of the risk of paying a penalty, so we've erred on the side of over-complying a little bit. If we were to over-comply and then a little bit and then one big contract gets disqualified for some reason that we had no ability to predict, then we would be in an under-compliance situation and face a penalty. So we might end up looking more toward owning the renewable resources in the future as the buffer against the uncertainties of contract compliance or compliance via contracts. So that could change the strategy. And this is the last slide. We've got, we're looking at options. We're getting new proposals for 2022 and after. Some of them are too early for us, and we're just not interested right now in getting spending money when we don't have to. We'll be looking at some pretty standard characteristics of these proposals. We need to get the energy to Glendale, and that's going to require us to acquire some additional transmission capacity at some point, because we will be replacing high capacity factor resources with low capacity factor resources, so it'll take a bigger pipe to get the energy through. And that means paying more to Los Angeles for transmission access at some point. And then we will have to evaluate how to integrate them. New Grayson, third-party storage. There is a new IRP requirement in SB 350. We just did one last year, so we don't feel a lot of pressure right now. But given a big decision about the Intermountain Power Project that's coming up in 2019, and given regulations that we expect to be developed between now and 2019, it probably will make sense to update the IRP, not do a new complete one, but update assumptions and rerun the models and get new results probably in 2018. So that's what I have.
I have a quick question. Going back maybe one slide. You mentioned in the future we probably will consider owning more of our own renewables.
We might, yes.
Yeah, we might. And what percentage were you thinking? Like by, I know we have to reach 50%.
And of that 50%, 65% will have to be long-term contracts or owned. So if we take 2/3 of the 50,
okay,
that gives you the target where we hit that balance between
30,
ownership and
30 plus maybe. Okay.
Yeah, so if we're in the 35% range to meet that new 65% 65% of 50%, then we're looking at varying that number in terms of ownership, maybe by a few percentage points. Because, and the other way to look at it, another way to look at it is is to translate the percentage into megawatt hours. So 10% of our load is about 100,000, 120,000 megawatt hours. 5% is 60,000, 50 to 60,000 megawatt hours. So you're looking at owning enough capacity. Let's say we targeted 5%. We'd have to own enough renewable capacity to get 50 to 60,000 megawatt hours a year, which means we'd have to own about 200 megawatts of renewables because of the capacity factor on the renewables, unless we got some of the super wind from southeast Wyoming, which has a much higher capacity factor.
Right. And at the current time, with the 20% that we are meeting, what percentage of that do we own?
Well, we only own Grayson, the landfill gas, which is about 75,000 a year, and we own Tieton, which is about 20,000 a year, if I'm doing the math right in my head. And all of the other renewable resources are under contract. We don't own Pebble, we don't own Wyoming.
Right.
don't own high winds. They're all just long-term contracts, which, as you can see, fall off in that graph over
Some
time.
contracts expire, yeah.
So actually, when we get down to, when we get down to 2030, we still have some renewable contract. That's a mixture still of owned and renewable, owned and contracted.
2030.
When we get down to 300,000-ish, 325,000 by 2030, that's still a mixture of owned and contracted.
Right, but a lot less with the contract, because some expire.
A lot less with the contracted because the owned resources just continue to be ours. Yes.
Right, and so the new renewables that we may need to consider owning. Did you say proposals are coming in for those?
SCAPA has a rolling RFP, so there are always proposals coming into SCAPA, and we look at those, and then sometimes the developers come to us directly because sometimes a bilateral arrangement is easier to put together, and sometimes they're able to tailor a proposal to SCAPA better, taking into account our needs or Burbank's or Pasadena's. But we have, and even though the ITC was extended, the investment tax credit, it's phased out over time. So the really cheap prices that were being pitched today, they may or may not be there in 5 years. They may be there because the technologies have improved, and they may not be there because the technologies have not improved, but the ITC has been phased out.
So the majority of those will need to come in around 2030, right?
We can see where the gap gets big, right there.
Yeah.
So by the time we get to 2030, we have a really big gap to fill. Yes.
Right. So we have 14 years, and we're receiving proposals. And okay, how confident are you that we'll be able to get everything in time? Very.
Yes, I think so. You have enough. I mean, if you look at the state as a whole, the state as a whole has to go to 50%. And we are small enough that we will benefit from all of the development that takes place for the rest of the state.
Okay.
We'll take a little piece of one project and maybe a little piece of another project, et cetera, to develop a portfolio.
Okay.
So, Lon, what public policy interest is being served by that 65% mandate? Because I can understand why you would want to incentivize local production or incentivize directly connected production because it's easier to verify that those electrons are coming in. But long-term contracts versus ownership versus short-term contracts versus compliance, why does the legislature care quite how we comply with RPS, provided that they fit within bucket one?
Well, you're asking me to peer into the mind of a legislator.
Well, no, I'm just wondering if there was anything in the legislative record that would sort of indicate where that came from, or whether it was just...
I could speculate if you'd like, but I don't know that would be a good thing. I think it's legislative action. So there's lobbyists, and there's special interest groups who benefit from longer-term contracts.
Understood, but seems like something like that could also be revisited with a better policy interest in mind.
I don't disagree with you at all, Mr. Hale.
And I think that maybe we could include things like feed-in tariff or net metering in that 65%, such that it's not necessarily private or it's not necessarily owned by the utility, and it's not necessarily long-term contract, although some of the feed-in tariff stuff is and some of the net metering stuff is. But maybe those should count within that 65% because it's a locally supported local investment that's been made in order to incentivize that renewable.
And we're working through SCAPA to encourage the CEC to think of long-term contract in a lot of different ways, because it just says long-term contract. Well, what does long-term contract mean? Well, we can talk about that for a while.
Eye of the beholder there, yeah.
Yes.
And to be fair, I was blame it all on the special interest groups, but I think there was some concern that longer term meant more stability and people were getting to the goal versus like, okay, we'll do it this year. We got this 1 year deal or we got this 2 month deal, and all of a sudden you go, that thing fell through, and here you are. So I think more stability and some level of insurance that we are moving in the right direction to that goal by having longer-term contracts. But I agree 100% with you, Mr. Hale. I think there's other ways to skin that cat.
I could make an argument the other way, too, which is that you don't want to necessarily invest in a long-term contract when in a period of rapid technological change when storage is going to become more cheap or
Yep.
right.
Absolutely.
So that's a head scratcher for me.
It is. I think another way to look at it, though, is that we're going to be spreading our new commitments out over a period of time, probably starting in 2019 or 2020, and then picking up pieces as we move out through time. And the projections that we got in the IRP suggested that the cost of renewables was expected to come down over time, with economies of scale and new technologies and blah, blah, blah. And so to that extent, as we sign new contracts, hopefully they will become less expensive and not more expensive.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive presentation. I really appreciate the level of detail that you went into. It was very helpful. I think the thing that really stood out to me was going to this 50% horizon and what that will mean in terms of storage technologies, because obviously we have, almost 14 years until we hit 2030 and that 50% goal. And just looking at the way that storage technology is changing right now, it's almost impossible to predict what it's going to be, in practically 15 years.
That's true.
So I just think it's going to be very interesting to see how these storage units ultimately are deployed and how they work within the system, and welcome you coming back and letting us know how that project works.
One of the nice things about storage is it doesn't have a very long lead time right now. We signed the contract last month, and it'll be installed this year. So it's not like finding huge tracts of land and moving the tortoises out of the way and building transmission lines and things like that. It's a lot faster. So we can, hopefully delay acquisition of storage to the point in time where it becomes much more cost effective.
And there are some other agencies that are putting in battery storage too, so we can certainly monitor their progress and bring that back a couple different ways. One I know is IID, who's using it as part of their power plant operation, and obviously out in that part of the state it's very hot a lot throughout most of the year, so how they manage their facility. But there is, as Lon said, a lot of questions still about how to best manage these batteries and becoming a little bit more adept and expert at how to manage those. But I think it's certainly something, we're looking forward to our little 2 megawatt and seeing how that works. The proposed Grayson Repower includes a much larger facility for future battery growth, so we're going to build that in to the facility. So certainly the future is very, very exciting when it comes to that type of technology.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, let's move on to 4D, please.
Okay, 4D is PBC update. Craig Keenan.
President Hale, Commissioners, my name is Craig Keenan. I'm the Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. I'm here to give you an overview of our budgets and programs for PBC. So just a little background on the PBC program. It's a state-mandated charge on the electric bill, and it funds programs primarily in 4 categories: cost-effective demand-side management, new investment in renewables, research development projects, and bill discounts or other services for low income. Our current charge is 3.6% of revenues, and it's on each bill. We put together a 2-year plan of budgets and programs. We take it to City Council every 2 years, and we'll be taking one to City Council here in the next month or so. Typically, the annual budget is between $6 and $6.5 million, and right now we're funding about 18 programs with that. In terms of breakdown of where the funds go, And this is pretty standard throughout the years. Administration is usually around 7 or 8%. Low income is pretty good chunk, about 37%. Residential, that's general residential, primarily solar and energy efficiency type programs. And then we have business programs around 17%. So the low income programs we have right now, I have 4 listed, but the first 2 are essentially the same program. It's a bill discount for low-income customers. It's $13 per month right now. We're going to raise that to, or recommend raising that to $14 in this next cycle. We're currently, just a little background on that. The average low-income bill is about $37 a month. And the $13 it's about 35% of their bill. So I believe the IOUs are only at like 25% of the bill. So our discount is pretty high. And when we move it to 14, it'll go from 35 to about 38. And we went on a dollar per month basis because we still wanted to encourage electricity savings in low-income homes. Because if you just do percent of the bill, it really is not tied. The more you use, the bigger your benefit, kind of thing.
So, is there any specific outreach to those participants in the low-income program to do energy efficiency and water savings and things like that to help offset those bills even further?
Yes, we do a lot of outreach on our PBC programs. It's on our website, and we have our newsletter, The Source, that we email out, and things are advertised in there.
Is there any sort of specific sort of outreach? Well, one is that, would that be legal to sort of reach out to them on a more case-by-case basis and have staff reach out to those participants to sort of...
Yeah, on an individual basis? No, we don't do that in that way.
It would be legal to do that. You could certainly set up a PBC program to do that.
Okay.
The other 2 programs, we have a Guardian program. Technically, we call it a low-income program, but it's for medical discount. And it basically, customers with medical equipment, then they can be pretty expensive to operate some of these, like as much as $50, $60 a month for some equipment. And that's doctor prescribed. They have to renew their application every year. And so we provide that. And the Helping Hand program is to help people with deposits and one-time bill payment assistance. In terms of residential programs, we have a number of general residential programs. The AC Tune-Up program, basically it's a system we do with Procter Engineering. They go out and they take different readings on the AC unit and then tune it up and make sure that it's the right amount of it used to be Freon, I don't know what it's called now, that's in there to make sure the system's functioning right. We have the Living Wise program, which is in conjunction with the Glendale Unified School District and some private schools, where we provide packets that have light bulbs and other educational materials, and it's offered through the schools. Tree Power provides shade trees that are for up to 3 per household, and they look at where to place them to shade the house and help with reducing power. We have our SEVA thermostat program. Provides the frame, which you see there, and we're starting to offer smart thermostats, and there will be an app that will allow you to adjust your thermostat and other appliances you might have in your house in the future that operate off a Zigbee type radio. We have our O-Power home energy reports, and basically that's the one that kind of compares to a quote neighbor, but it's not really a neighbor, it's just the average of 100 homes, similarly sized homes around you. And then we also have the Behavior Demand Response Program. We've been doing that in the summer, past 2 summers. And it sends out a notification to customers saying we're going to have a hot day tomorrow. We'd like you to save energy, and we send notices out, and it tracks and compares how much somebody saved and ranks them. It's sort of like It's like a social kind of thing and sort of a game thing, and it'll give you results after a couple days of where you ranked next to your, like I said, neighbors. We have our energy and water saving rebate program, and that provides rebates to a number of different things. Energy Star clothes washers, refrigerators, air conditioners, dishwashers, things like that. And we're looking to offer a rebate for an EV charger, and we're looking to look into that. Now, I went over the solar a month or so ago, but we do have we'd have two solar targeting residential. One is a solar schools program that's in conjunction with the Rawhouse Institute, and you may have seen it. Every year we do like a fair, and students, that's what that picture is there. Their students will have little kits, solar kits, and learn about solar energy, and they might do like a solar oven and different things, and we do that every year. And then we have our Solar Solutions program, which provides the incentives for grid-connected solar on your house.
So among your residential programs, what's your rate of penetration, aside from the low income, what's the rate of penetration for those programs in multifamily?
For low income?
No, apart from low income. So in other words, the solar programs and the
They're probably, I don't know exactly how many multifamily do solar, but I don't think it's a big number. It's mostly single family. Although we've had a couple in the past and we've done some affordable housing programs through the city of Glendale. I don't know how many buildings, 2 or 3 buildings, and there were sizable systems on there.
And that's new construction, Craig?
Yeah, that was new construction. Or we've done, what is it called? The low-income housing, the small housing, the Jimmy Carter.
Affordable housing.
No,
Habitat for Humanity.
We've done solar on those in the past.
And Mr. Hale, I think probably our best bet at getting more multifamily online is community solar. And that's something we're looking at. We're kind of at the beginning stages of that, but certainly that's probably where you're going to get most of the participation for multifamilies would be from some sort of community solar.
And we'll probably look at that once we get done with the SB1 obligations, and then we can look at different programs, and that could be one.
Before you move on, with the solar solutions, I know very often that due to budget constraints, like once you meet the budget amount, then it's closed. I mean, then there's a waiting list. What's the status right now?
Well, last year we added $1 million to the budget. So typically it was $1.5 million. So we went back and added another $1 million to it,
okay.
to $2.5 million, to cover all the applications we received. You'll see that we're adding more money this year as well, and we're going to then have a sort of a lottery process we're developing with legal to come up with a lottery to make sure that it's.
So it's open at the current time, open and available?
No, we closed it, but everybody who applied this year was included. So nobody went on a waiting list. So there is no waiting list this year.
Okay.
We added an additional $1 million in order to accommodate everyone.
This
Part
year,
of it, if I don't know if I had reported this, but one of the issues was the first come, first served basis. We had a little bit of an issue with those who came personally to line up in front of the door versus those who put their applications in via email. Our server didn't act appropriately. It was unfair. So to make that right, and we had a pretty good rush this year, likely because there was an anticipation that the solar programs might not be renewed as far as the incentives go. So we had a pretty good rush, but it was legitimate. Our system didn't react, so our response was, let's go ahead and fund everybody this year. And then, as Craig said, working with Ms. Godinez is to come up with some sort of a lottery system so there's a better sense of fairness to how we do it. Versus just the first come, first serve. So
I see. When was it? When was the deadline for the
Oh,
submittal?
well, I don't know what date it was, but it takes all of about less than an hour.
It took about an hour.
Yeah.
By an hour?
Yeah.
For
It,
$2.5 million worth
oh, yeah.
of.
It was, yeah, I think by 9 a.m. we were done.
Yeah.
Was like maybe a couple months ago or something?
Oh,
No, this was
beginning of the fiscal year.
July 1st.
July 1st last year.
Yeah, first
Got
of the
it.
fiscal year, we do it, we cut it loose, and
Got it.
within an hour or so, we had full capacity.
And we do have, limitations as far as how much money we actually have in the fund
Right.
to be able to handle this.
Right.
It just so happened we did have extra money, so,
An extra $1 million. Okay.
yes.
Okay, well, thank you.
So in terms of business programs, we have a small business program where we actually modeled this after low-income weatherization. It targets small businesses. Usually, small business owners don't have time to hire people or to learn about energy efficiency and water conservation. So we started a program a number of years ago, and basically we pay for an energy audit and we give up to $2,000 worth of free energy saving lighting. It's mostly lighting, but it can be other things, air conditioning and refrigeration and things like that. That's a very good program. We have a smart business AC tune-up program. It's similar to the residential one. They go out and tune up the air conditioner. And our big customer program is Business Energy Solutions, and it provides up to $50,000 in an incentive towards an energy efficiency project. And it's the amount that they receive it's limited by how much they're putting in, and it's limited to 6 cents per saved kilowatt hour. So we get a lot of savings from that program. And then we have our two business solar programs. Just to note, the large business program, since we have such demand for the residential and the small business as well, we haven't been opening that program the past couple of years, because one customer could come in and take the $2.5 million, and that's just not right. So that's the program descriptions. In terms of budgets, the budget for the low income, it's going to go up a little bit because of the dollar increase we're proposing. Every dollar increase is about $170,000 a year in more benefits. And just to note, as far as low income, we provided about $20 million in bill discounts to low income in Glendale since we started these programs, and that's about 120,000 households. In terms of general residential, the budget is pretty much it's the same as last year, with the exception of the solar program. In 16-17, currently the budget is at $1.6 million. That's about what we had last year. And then I've also budgeted some in the following year, just in case the projects aren't finished in that first year. Because the SB1 program technically is supposed to end December 31st, Christine, 2016. But legally, I guess we could continue it if council wants to. In terms of our business programs, it's pretty much the same as we've had the past 2 years. Let's see. So total expenditures, actually, it's going to be up about $1.1 million in the first, or in 16-17, and that's primarily the solar. And so that's the presentation, if you have any questions.
Commissioners, any questions?
Craig, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but along the lines of, I think, what President Hale was asking about our outreach to the low income on subsidy, do you have an idea on what percentage of the eligible population we're serving in that program? I know we talked about it one time.
I've tried to come up with that number in the past using census data. I'd have to go back and look. I know we've never turned anybody down based on funding. Anybody who applies, we'll find the money to put them in the program.
Yeah, it would seem like it would be a relatively simple thing to do outreach to whoever pays the bill, because it's a defined universe. We know exactly who the customers are.
I know we do specific outreach at
Yeah.
least once a year because we change the low-income guidelines and send out all that information to everybody.
To every customer.
Yes.
And then our customer service folks are well-versed in this, so
Yes.
immediately once they get a customer in a situation where they realize they may be eligible for that, they start to talk to them.
Right.
Right.
How much discretion do you have in terms of how you divide up the pie for the money that comes through this program? So that I understand that it's a state mandated charge, but then do they also mandate how you allocate the funding?
No. The state law, the way it's written, you can put it all in one category if you wanted to.
Okay. So the programs that you've outlined here are programs that are really designed specifically for Glendale. In other words, it's not a state program that we are simply funding and building out internally. It's something that
Right. It's grown to
been
meet our
homegrown,
needs.
basically.
There are other California Energy Commission mandates, like percent of revenue in terms of energy savings you have to generate each other year. That's not specific to the PBC program, but the biggest contributor to meeting those goals are our energy efficiency programs.
So they set the amount we get, and then they set the broad categories of how we can spend that money. And then it's up to us to decide which of those categories, how much we want to spend in each of those categories, if we want to spend any at all. Or as Craig said, all in one.
Right.
And again, I thought I heard somebody ask about water conservation. This is strictly energy. This is only related to energy.
Right.
We do not have a program like this in water. Obviously, with Prop 218, we can subsidize rates. That's illegal at this point in time. Although my understanding is the legislature is looking at the potential to create something like the PBC program for water. That includes the ability to subsidize rates. And then most of the programs, the conservation programs we participate in are the portals that we have with MWD. So as an MWD member, our residents are all eligible for their various programs, and we usually sign up for the full gamut of those, whether it's efficient toilet rebates to turf replacement and whatever the program may be. So.
And we do list those water conservation items on our website under the same program as
Right.
the energy efficiency programs, and there's energy savings associated with the water too that we try and take credit for.
That's the nexus that some of the water folks are trying to make as you look at programs that are water specific.
Has GWP ever done audits of a specific home? Have you ever had a program where you've
Yes.
done, like,
We
where
have-
you basically come into a house and say, okay, you need to look at light bulbs, you need to look at how much water is going through your toilet and your shower heads? I mean, a holistic audit as
Yes.
opposed to just focus on one.
We had a program, it was operated through KEMA. They actually had an office here in Glendale, and I think it operated from about 2003 or so to maybe 4 years ago. The program was quite expensive, and it was mostly justified, because you have to justify these energy efficiency programs based on energy savings. And it was mostly justified based on going from incandescent lighting to LED lighting.
Right.
Well, when the state mandated everybody have LED lights, there was no more savings, and you couldn't really justify the program anymore. Because it costs a lot of money to send a truck to a house to go through, and most of the savings is lighting, and everybody has LED lights all right now. So
Well, unless you're going to do really big capital expenditures like replacing
Right.
all your windows or
yes,
something like that, which is
and we do offer a rebate for windows, and it's I think it's $1 or $2 a square foot, but you have to go through planning and get approvals and that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that brings us to 4E, the legislative update.
For a legislative update, Silva Orgulian.
Good afternoon, President and members of the Commission. My name is Silva Orgulian. I'm the Community Outreach Associate for Glendale Water and Power. And I have just a brief update for legislative items today. I'd like to discuss two Assembly bills which the City of Glendale has taken a formal position on. The first being Assembly Bill 2709 by Assemblymember Quirk regarding Mylar balloons. California's electrical utilities are responsible for providing increasing amounts of renewable and conventional energy. These energy resources are expected to be both reliable and safely conveyed to customers through a vast transmission and distribution network. Each year, electric utilities experience power outages that occur as a direct result of the release of Mylar balloons. And that results in power outages to several thousand commercial and residential customers. This bill basically will prohibit the sale of metallic balloons as of the year 2018, and it will lead to a reduction in power outages resulting from the release of balloons. I've provided a copy of the letter that that the City of Glendale sent in support, which was sent to the chairman's office, and the bill is currently in the Committee on Public Safety.
It seems funny, I know. It is very, and this isn't the first time it's been approached. It got hammered the last time it went up to the legislature. I will tell you that the balloon lobby is very strong, very, very strong. If you can imagine in a room with the likes of PG&E and Edison, and the Mylar balloon industry is able to hammer that down. But I mean, you're talking about not only the manufacturers of the material, but the florists and the party planners and party stores throughout the state. But I will tell you, it is a major problem. Outside of rodents and critters, this is number one for us. So thus the position, we don't want to ruin your party or anybody's party. But latex balloons don't cause us any problems, so we'd love for all the latex balloons in the world to be manufactured.
Not possible to ban squirrels.
It is not.
Sorry.
No, that would get us in a whole other realm of trouble, I'm sure, with PETA and others. But just nature's course, and they like to gnaw at certain wires, and that ends up bad for them, but also bad for us and some of our customers. But
I was working in the Capitol when Senator Jack Scott was attempting the last go at this in 2008, I think. I wish Mr. Quirk the best of luck.
Yeah, you have firsthand knowledge. And I was actually amazed. I didn't think, when you think about it again, the power and the ability of these large electrical utilities, they just got hammered. They just got hammered by the balloon industry. And it's look, as you said, President Hale, it's 8 years. It took 8 years for somebody to have enough courage to bring it back, but we'll see what the outcome is. There is now a larger balloon lobby, I guess, a consolidated effort who part of what they're reaching out to do is to act as a PR firm and see if they can work in concert with the electrical utilities to find a happy compromise on this, which is a little better, but we'll see. We'll see how it all goes. I'm sorry, Silva.
That's okay. Thank you.
So I had to talk about the balloon.
Well,
Ramon would be proud of me.
thank you. The second bill is regarding net energy metering, Assembly Bill 2339 by Assembly members Irwin and Lowe. This bill would require municipal utilities to recalculate the program cap for net energy metering, and it would significantly increase the net energy metering obligation for municipal utilities by requiring a recalculation of aggregate customer peak demand based upon the highest sum of non-coincident peak demands of all customers of electric utilities in that service area that occurs in any calendar year. The City of Glendale and Water and Power strongly support efforts to help achieve California's ambitious clean energy and climate change reduction goals. However, we oppose mandating identical net energy metering approach for municipal utilities via legislation. Glendale Water and Power, along with other local utilities, are continuing to work together to seek further amendments on this bill. The bill is currently in the Committee the Utilities and Commerce, and per the chairman, Assemblymember Mike Otto, the bill was held in committee to continue working on the issues that it has and towards clarifying the amendments. And I've provided copies of both of the letters that we mailed to them. That's all that I have for you today, if you have any questions.
Thank you.
I have a question. Who are the local utilities that are also opposing this?
We are actually working with SCAPA as well as locally. Glendale is working with Burbank and Pasadena to see if we can get in touch with the chairman's office.
A broader answer is from the Oregon border to the Mexican border, every POU has some issues with this.
Some issues, yeah.
So it's a work in progress. There's a lot of horse trading going on. They've talked about setting meter standards, so that a utility of a certain number of meters would then have to qualify. There's been the Sacramento Municipal Utility District has proposed some amendments that are being considered. As Silva indicated, our understanding is the chairman is not even happy about the way things have gone. So Burbank and Glendale tomorrow will try to reach Assemblyman Gatto and talk to him a little bit about what our concerns are as his constituents, and he also happens to be the chair of the committee. So there's a lot of different things that are going around, and this is something that came up in SB 350. It didn't get necessarily addressed, I think, to the extent that some had wanted it to be, but the word was it was going to come right back and we were going to talk about it, and sure enough, here it is. So you have the issue essentially of the solar contractors and solar providers and utilities and the impacts that there is between that relationship. So we're working through it. I think probably more like next week, we hope to have a little bit more information, but we'll keep you posted on this.
So at the current time, do we have a NEM obligation?
It's state required, but we have the minimum. We're meeting the minimum.
What is our requirement at this time?
I wish Craig were here and he could say, I believe it's 5% of our peak demand, but it's now that they're redefining how that's classified, and it increases the amount.
To
So it's
5%
not.
of coincident peak demand as opposed to
so it goes to
peak demand. I'm simplifying.
know?
So it doesn't change the 5%. It changes the 5% of what?
I
So it
believe
changes
that's
the
right.
of what?
Yes.
So in other words, it recalculates.
Exactly. Yeah. The demand.
It recalculates what 100%
A non-coincident.
means, which then affects what our
Right.
portion of the
Quantity.
5%.
And then there's peak and super peak, and there's
It would be interesting to know sort of in real terms what this bill would mean, and maybe that's something we can get as an update or a corollary update on our next agenda or our next agenda.
I think in general is we're just being cautious in that, putting solar is great, and we encourage that, and especially our ability to claim that as a renewable source. But the sense that sometimes folks, it's either part of the marketing program or what they're told is that frees you from the utility. It doesn't free you from the utility. There's still a number of costs that we're required to incur in order to keep the infrastructure up, and that cost has to be equitably shared in our belief. And so we want to make sure that we're not subsidizing one particular individual over another, that the greater infrastructure has to be maintained, because it doesn't, solar isn't the end all. Maybe solar with batteries someday could be.
Well, and going back to my earlier point, Steve, if this counts towards our 65% long-term owned quota, then there's a compromise to be found somewhere in the middle. Where
Yeah, I agree. We'll keep you posted.
And with this increase, that's going to be passed on to the participants. That would be in the form of the public benefits charge, right? Would it go in there?
No.
Just curious.
This is ultimately going to lay at the feet of the ratepayers.
In our.
Depending on where this lands and whatever subsidies or whatever.
That would still go to the
NEM payments.
ratepayer.
When it caused the physical aspect, the panels and that can all be gone through the
Would
PV
be part of your
program
budget,
and be subsidized through that. That's the actual installation. purchase and installation. But when you're talking about the net energy metering and what the monthly charges are going to be and what you save versus what goes back into the grid, those ultimately, the cost of the utility gets passed on to the customers. That's why I said we need to make sure there's equity here.
Right.
And that somebody who puts a solar project on their home, albeit great, to make sure that whatever costs are being deferred to that particular individual isn't being burdened by others who, in multifamily, for instance, Mr. Hale mentioned, the impact of solar to multifamily is not that great because it's just, it isn't the same. It's not as convenient. So multifamily customers end up paying more because somebody has solar at their, it's not fair. So there's an equity issue. We encourage it. We just want to see it get into an area that everybody recognizes that and says, okay, so how can we best meet that and make sure we stay fair and equitable in our rate structure? That's kind of where we're at. Mm-hmm. And just because folks have solar doesn't eliminate our, GWP's, requirement to have certain infrastructure in place. We can't shut down substations and take lines out and reconfigure the power plant. We have to be ready at all times. So,
and that customer still consumes electricity at night.
Correct. The sun doesn't shine all day long, and it doesn't shine consistently, as we all know. So, and we talked about smoothing and shaping earlier. That's another issue. So, all of those costs have to be put in, and there's, the infrastructure itself doesn't go away. So, we got to find a compromise and keep working at it. We don't want to discourage folks from putting in solar, but at the same time, we don't want to burden somebody else who maybe couldn't afford to put solar in or doesn't have a facility that's capable of putting solar in. Again, a lot of it more equity than anything else. Fairness.
All right. Okay. I would really appreciate it if we get a little bit more info on that, as President Hale was talking. Sure. Okay, great. Thank you.
President Hale, with apologies, I have a commitment and have to get going.
No problem. I think we're almost done anyway, so thank you for joining us, Commissioner Lau. Let's move on to number 5, please.
5 is oral communications. Discussions limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Commission may request to respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The general manager may refer the matter to appropriate staff for investigation and report.
I have no cards at the desk. Madam Clerk, do you have any cards?
Nobody out there wants to speak. I can speak.
Without
6, agenda forecast.
We will move on to the agenda forecast. So, members, I'd like to propose that we add to the our meeting on the 2nd of May an AB 2339 update with a little bit more specific information about that bill and what it's going to do. I think we can flag the budget update is not tentative anymore. Is that correct?
It's not tentative, and starting at the top, that's not a drought rate update, but it's more of a drought conservation update. If there is any activity on the rate, we'll certainly include that into the discussion.
Understood. And members, I have a number of recommendations for our hearing on the 6th, but I will go ahead and open it up to the floor for any suggestions that you guys might have.
And just a comment, we've on the 4th and the 1st, we've indicated no special meeting planned because we just haven't talked about it.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that we weren't planning on having one. We had thought about maybe giving you a summer month off and then scheduling a special meeting for the other month, whatever it is your pleasure, 4th of July or Labor Day.
What I want to do is propose a few things for our meeting in June, and then you and I can connect offline and probably connect with the rest of the commissioners by email to see if there's a special date that works for all of us, and then we'll put the notice out for that.
I can think of one. You were giving us an update, I think, on the strategic plan. Like it was supposed to be like a quarterly update. I don't see it anywhere.
Which strategic
like
plan?
the one where he actually tells us like
Red,
what
green,
milestone?
yellow?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Oh, right.
Yes.
That one. Mm-hmm.
You know what? That actually makes a little bit of sense to do along with the budget, I would think,
sure.
right?
Yeah, May or June. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
we did tentatively have that as a quarterly update, so I don't know where that might
it fell off.
Yeah, but we'll get that on there.
May or June?
I'd propose May.
Okay.
That seems to make sense along
Quarterly
with the budget.
Update. Yeah.
The overall strategic plan is an ongoing effort, obviously, and then we have a specific fiscal year set of strategic goals and objectives, which we can include with the budget. I can do both of them in May. It's just May's getting a little full.
Yep.
Right.
The electrical maintenance program is better termed electrical capital program, and to be honest with you, that'll be rolled in the budget too, because you'll see that year's capital program. We can talk a little bit about it there, but yeah, we can talk about the strategic plan in general in May or June, whatever you like.
Okay.
And then we'll set it quarterly from there.
So I would propose May for the strategic plan, just because it does interface nicely with the budget, and it doesn't need to be an extensive, lengthy presentation. But for June, I would propose another quick legislative update. We're going to be hitting some constitutional deadlines for bills, I think, that it makes sense for us to get an update on where things are at. I would propose that we actually get a more comprehensive statewide drought update, where we talk about what's going on with the state's water supplies, the California Water Project, the LA Aqueduct, and MWD's supply, that sort of thing.
I think by June we should have a much better idea. In fact, I would hope by the end of April we do. But
right, but it just makes sense for us to sort of cover that in June. We'll have a lot of good information and plenty of time to put a good presentation together. So something different than our usual conservation update, but more of a statewide look at where we're at on the drought. Then I'd also propose that we get an update on natural gas supplies in light of the Aliso Canyon gas leak.
You want to wait all the way till June to talk about that? I mean,
well,
technically,
that's why
we probably should have talked about it today. Because
that's why I bring it up, because it's wearing my other LA hat. I'm hearing some very scary things about supply curtailments and summer month blackouts and things like that.
Maybe how about doing it in May then?
Yeah, why don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can give it, and we should know a lot more tomorrow, as both the governor, the state legislature, the CEC are going to have some press conferences, I think in Sacramento and here in Los Angeles. There's also supposed to be an action plan, so we'll get a better look at that. But there's certainly concerns. There's concerns on the part of our transmission area, which is LA's transmission area, and the real possibility, depending on load requirements and weather, that we could face blackouts, rolling blackouts.
The other, there are so many issues with this that need to be discussed, because there's also a Pavley bill that would permanently curtail the use of the Aliso Canyon storage facility, and that's kind of the region's natural gas facility. That will certainly affect the economics of whatever we're planning to do with the Grayson plant.
It'll affect the economics of
everything that we do. Yeah, everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. But it certainly affects the long-term planning process that we're going to do, and all of the cost assumptions that we've made about natural gas, if that storage facility is not replaced in some way.
If they can't make that gas up,
right,
we definitely have an issue, and it will be probably, it's a little more concerning for us on a summertime basis than we had thought before.
Right.
But the region definitely will be in trouble in the winter when the gas consumption is at its highest. But yeah, absolutely right. The availability of gas will affect everything. It'll affect Magnolia. It'll affect Burbank, Pasadena. It'll affect all of us. And so.
All right. So May.
Yeah. Well, let's do it in May. I don't think you want to wait till June.
Probably not.
June will probably be in the middle of it.
Yeah. That's probably true.
So, Mr. President, if I may suggest then, we've added strategic plan, and I know we can do it short, but I don't want to short shift it.
Sure.
We've got AB 2399 and Aliso. Can I suggest maybe we move the customer service quarterly update?
Yes.
And even the reliability update, because that is more routine. Our reliability is phenomenal, if I say so myself, and not something of concern. That's why I don't think it's as urgent as maybe some of these other matters we've talked about. That'll give you. I want to make sure we don't short the time on the budget, because the budget's is something we can just, it isn't a 15-minute presentation, and I'm sure we want to go over it. Capital, M&O, power purchase, and future look.
Agreed. All right, so that means in May, we'll have our conservation update, an update on AB 2339, an update on the strategic plan, an update on natural gas, an update on the electrical maintenance program, and then our budget presentation, which leaves for June the customer service quarterly update, an electrical reliability update, a legislative update, and a statewide drought update.
Got it.
Okay?
Perfect.
All right. Without objection, that will be, I do try.
Sounds good. 7, adjournment.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And seconded by Commissioner Avanesian, and without objection, we are adjourned.